Well, hi there. Hello, and welcome back to the Pitch Grid. Thank you so much for joining us once again for another episode. We are a podcast that covers the National Football League or American football and EFL Championship or the second tier of English football. And we cover all the news, analysis, and everything going on in leagues in those past week. Without further ado, let's get on into it. We start in the NFL. It has been a busy week. It has been NFL draft and we have lots to talk about, so let's get right into it. So, we had the first round on Thursday. It was a round full of interesting surprises and twists. We had, of course, Titans picking number one, and they took Cam Ward, which we expected kind of. I think that was not too surprising considering they had been linked to him for so long and they were just looking for a quarterback to give some competition to Will Levis because Will Levis has not panned out like the Titans thought he would probably, and he just needs some competition, something to motivate him to get going. And they think Cam Ward's the best choice for that. Now, some people do think that he is a bit overrated. I do think he has a lot of the skills and tool set needed to succeed. He is kind of raw, athletic. He has the physical tangibilities. The question is, will he actually live up to those and be able to be molded into the quarterback that Brian Callahan needs there in Tennessee? The Titans, I think their entire draft hinges on if Cam Ward is good. If Cam Ward is good, this is an excellent draft by the Titans. They got some really good talent, even in the later rounds. They had a lot of, I think, really good steals, and they had got some high value in some positions of need and really addressed and attacked situations that really needed to be addressed there in Nashville. And I think they did an excellent job at that. The Jaguars made the first splash of the draft as they traded up 3 picks to get Travis Hunter. So the two-way athlete goes to Jacksonville, probably the best pick of the Jaguars draft. Honestly, the Jaguars had such an up and down draft that it feels very all over the place. You felt like they had a good pick here in Travis Hunter and a couple more good solid picks, but otherwise it felt like they were all over the place and didn't really know quite what to do, including taking a couple of running backs, which feels weird, but that's how it goes sometimes. It also feels like the new GM there in Jacksonville has a very specific type of player he wants. In this draft, let's be honest, this was a draft filled with defensive talent and a lot of teams really hit that side of the ball this draft. And we saw that quite honestly in a few of these teams that drafted this year, including the next one, the Giants, who took Abdul Carter. He was a very solid pick for them. They needed an edge. They needed someone who could help complement Dexter Lawrence there in the pass rush. And they got him. I mean, they were rumored to get Shador Sanders. Instead, they trade up and later on in the first round and get Jackson Dart. That was a surprise. I don't think anyone saw the Giants going up for Dart. Dart is a very enigmatic, polarizing quarterback. To some, he's really good. To some, he can be hit or miss. I tend to be in the middle. I don't think he's exactly awful, but I don't think he's exactly great either. I think you could have probably let him slide to the second round if you're the Giants and grab him there if you wanted to. I think it's a lot to give up for a first round pick. What they gave up a future first to go get him too, which is, in my opinion, a lot just to trade back into the first round to get Jackson Darton. If they're that confident, because apparently this is Brian Dable's pick, this was him thinking this is my Josh Allen type, which is the quarterback that he's well known for, of course, because he was the offensive coordinator at Buffalo for a while and really helped unlock Josh Allen's potential when it felt like Josh Allen was starting to kind of regress and be kind of a bust. So if Ryan Dable believes in him this much, they better have gotten this right, or else it's him and Schoen that are out the door very quickly in New York. This feels very much like a gamble, but at the same time, you have to respect the hustle. You have to respect that the confidence that they had in that pick. The Giants also got Cam Scatabo from Arizona State. I thought that was a solid pick. They haven't had a really great running back as well. They, to me, felt like they needed some type of weapon like that. They really didn't address receiver, and I really felt like they needed to address receiver, and that feels like a missed opportunity for the Giants. Also, they didn't address linebacker as well. They really did hammer the offensive and the defensive line and the secondary. It feels like a very interesting draft to think back on. You really don't quite know what to think about it, but there you are. The Patriots, they went fourth in the first round and selected Will Campbell out of LSU, one of the top prospects in this draft from the offensive line. He ran a sub 540 and is considered to be one of the best NFL made prospects. I think the Patriots had one of the sneaky best drafts in the entire league. They hammered every single position of need that they needed to, and with some good value, some great talent, they really, I think, hit it out of the park. Not just with Will Campbell. They had picks like Kyle Williams out of Washington State, who, when they grabbed him, it was a decent value for him as well. They also got Travion Henderson, the running back out of Ohio State. Pair him with Ramondre Stevenson, maybe. That could be a good tandem of running backs. Then you get Jared Wilson out of Georgia in the third round. Very good value pick. And I think a lot of analysts are saying that as well. And then you hammer picks like Julian Ashby out of Vanderbilt. He is a good safety. You got so many good value picks in this draft that look like they could really hit, especially in the early rounds. This feels like the Patriots know what they're doing. They knew exactly how to attack this draft, and they did it with so much success. And it looks really good for this new regime that they're trying to protect Drake May, give him weapons, and then bolster the defense, especially with some good, solid edge rushers, some D tackles, and really Marcus Bryant also from Missouri feels like a solid pick in the seventh round. Then of course you got Andre Borregales from Miami to be the place kicker. I can't remember if they replaced Randy Folk or not, but if they did, I mean, that'll be interesting to see what the kicking situation is like in Foxborough. But Mike Vrabel got a very solid draft class, I think, in his first year of his tenure in New England as the head coach. And I think it's one of the better drafts. And then number 5, we had the Browns taking Mason Graham out of Michigan. Now, the Browns, I think, had a really solid couple of rounds to start off the draft. Mason Graham, pair him with Myles Garrett, very good stuff there. Then you go Carson Schweizinger out of UCLA. Also a very solid pick, trying to help bolster that defense. Then you get Quinshawn Judkins. Pair him with Nick Chubb. Maybe see how that goes from Jerome Ford if Chubb isn't quite healthy yet. Those felt like very solid picks. And then you even got a very underrated pick in Harold Fannin Jr. out of Bowling Green. A lot of people like him a lot. He has good catchability, good physical traits. He could be a very good one to, if Cleveland wants to go a two-end tight end set with Njoku, Fannin could be a very good prospect for that. Then you get to the last few rounds. You get Dylan Gabriel, right? Okay, so they're not going to take Shadur Sanders, we think, right? After they get Dylan Gabriel, that's the quarterback they're going after. They want Dylan Gabriel. And then they go Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee. Why? You don't really need a running back. You just got Quinshawn Judkins. I mean, yes, Sampson's a good running back, but he's going to be way down the depth chart at this point. With if Chubb comes back, they have Ford, and of course you have Judkins. Where is Sampson going to fit into that picture? Not only that, and then they get Shadur Sanders. So now the quarterback room is stuffed with players that you really don't know, because now we think about this. Deshaun Watson is hurt. He may be out the rest of the year. There's conflicting reports on that. Some people say he might, some say he will not miss the whole entire next season. There are rumors also that he could be cut if the Browns so choose. To me, why do you pick two quarterbacks? You don't want to pick two quarterbacks. In your quarterback room, you already have Joe Flacco, Deshaun Watson, Kenny Pickett, and now you have Dylan Gabriel and Shadur Sanders. Why do you have so many quarterbacks? And what is the direction in that position for the franchise? Because that could be everything in terms of building a team around them. And not only that, I mean, you give Deshaun Watson such a huge contract. Cutting him makes sense, right? But then why do you sign Joe Flacco? Why do you trade for Kenny Pickett and trade to DTR? Granted, DTR was kind of a bust in his 2 years in Cleveland. it doesn't make any sense at all, the direction, because now you do not know how Kevin Stefanski is going to build around whoever starts day one in Cleveland. That is going to be huge, I think. And I think this year is going to be very much a development year that could be quite hellish, to be honest. And not only that, the Browns don't even address offensive tackle or wide receiver. You need a receiver. You need a receiver in Cleveland. You go with an extra quarterback. I mean, do the Browns feel the pressure of going with Shador because he hadn't been drafted yet and didn't look like anyone was going to draft him? And the Browns have been rumored for so long. They liked him a lot, apparently. If that's the case, take Shador in the third round, not Dylan Gabriel. Now, Dylan Gabriel is going to be looking over his shoulders the entire time because Shador Sanders has such a bigger brand. He's going to have name recognition. He's going to have people saying he should start. Meanwhile, Dylan Gabriel's just sitting here on the bench like, I got drafted 2 rounds ahead of this guy. Obviously, he needs to outwork Shador now because he's been drafted, and draft position doesn't matter so much anymore as it did when it comes into the draft. But now he's going to be looking over his shoulder saying, am I going to be cut because of him? And that's a waste of a pick. It really just feels like they tanked the last 3 picks of that draft with an extra quarterback when they could have gotten a receiver, a good tackle, anything other than an extra quarterback. And it brings so many questions in my mind to the Browns organization. And it feels very typical Browns. And then we move on to Las Vegas, taking Ashton Genty out of Boise State. Solid pick for the Raiders. We like that a lot. They needed a running back. Zamir White wasn't going to be able to carry the team on his own. They also went with Jack Beck, a great receiver. You know, they needed a receiver as well. Pair him with Jacoby Myers. And then you get Darian Porter out of Iowa State. That felt kind of like a reach in the third round, early third round, when you could have gotten him probably late rounds. I think the best pick out of the later rounds from then on was J.J. Pegues out of Ole Miss, the defensive tackle in the 6th round. He feels like he could be a problem in that defensive line. Otherwise, this Raiders draft feels very much reaches at picks they didn't need to be and reaches for raw talent instead of just value picks. And they didn't even, I mean, there's one of these offensive tackles that they drafted. I think it was Charles Grant, that they drafted that could slide into guard potentially. However, it feels like there's still a lot of questions around the Raiders. They still have questions around quarterback, and I don't know if this exactly covered all of their needs either. And it feels like they didn't quite know in some areas where to go, especially with Colton Miller and the uncertainty around his future with the organization because he wants a new contract. So they had a couple solid early picks, and then it felt like they reached for a few. The Jets then picked Armand Membo at 7. Very good pickup for them at guard, or tackle, I should say. I don't think it was like a home run pick, but it was a solid pick. And then you had Mason Taylor coming out of LSU, another solid pick. And then Azariah Thomas out of Florida State. And you had some good picks in this draft. Tyler Barrett, Malachi Moore. This felt like a very solid draft. It didn't feel like they reached for anything really. Arian Smith might be kind of a meh pick, but it felt like they addressed a lot of the needs besides defensive tackle, and they met them with solid value picks that fell to them, and they didn't have to trade a ton, except they did trade up to get Malachi Moore and Tyler Barron. But those two felt like good picks to trade for, honestly. They give them some depth, they give them some competition, and it helps build up a defense, especially. It looks like they were trying to really hit the trenches and hit the defense to protect Justin Fields and make sure the defense is good, especially considering, Azariah Thomas is probably going to take the spot opposite Sauce Gardner to fill the void that is left by DJ Reed going to Detroit. So this felt like a very solid draft overall by the Jets, and I was rather impressed, to be honest. And I mean, their first year under Aaron Glenn, you go and get a rather solid draft to help support your coach and give him the best chance possible, especially since he's a defensive coach. He can coach these defensive guys up, and maybe, who knows, maybe they're not an awful team this year. Then you go to the Panthers at 8, and they grab Tedero and McMillan. Now, the Panthers, this felt like a reach to me, even though they need the receiver. He's one of the top receivers in the draft, right? But why do you go for him this early? It felt like a desperate reach move. I feel like you could have gotten him more of a value pick in the second or third round, and that probably would have been a lot better. It still feels a bit of a reach. But then you look at the other picks, like these aren't bad picks. Jimmy Horn in the sixth, that's a pretty underrated pick for a receiver out of Colorado who had some good production. Give Bryce Young another weapon along with McMillan. And then you get Trevor Etienne out of Georgia. Now, what this means for Chuba Hubbard's future, who knows? It feels like a lot of teams are going with two running back systems these days. Then you go with Cam Jackson out of Florida, good D tackle. Lathan Ransom is a good, solid pick at safety. This feels like a very overall solid draft for the Panthers. They didn't address corner, which kind of is iffy to me. But Nick Skirton out of A&M, he could be a good edge rusher. He's a raw talent. Think there was rumors that he could be drafted by the Panthers in round one, but McMillan proved too tempting apparently. He had 10 sacks at A&M. He's played a lot of different positions, and I think that also was very tempting. So I think this was a good overall pick to take in round two, and I think overall the Panthers did pretty well to give Canales some good weapons. Overall, I think a very solid draft class in his second year as the Panthers coach. Kelvin Banks was then taken. He was considered the top prospect in terms of tackles, right in front of Will Campbell, who the Patriots took. So a very solid tackle, considering they had Ramczyk retiring at the end of the season last year, so the Saints needed to replace that need. And then the Saints, it felt like they hit on a couple of things, and they also missed on a few things. They took Tyler Shuck out of Louisville, and a lot of people are saying he's old, that he's bounced around too much. But if Kellen Moore is the offensive genius that people say he is, he's going to be able to take Tyler Shuck and the raw ability he has and make him a good quarterback. And I think he has the intangibles to be. It's just, can he be coached up? Danny Stutzman was a great pick. And the fourth round, especially, that's a solid pick. Very good linebacker. Has great instincts, great tackling ability, and decent speed, too, by the way. Vernon Broughton out of Texas is another good pick. I feel like the Saints had some good picks. Devin Neal to me, that feels kind of weird. Though, at the same time, I think they lost Jamal Williams to free agency. So maybe that's who they're trying to replace. I feel like they needed to address receiver in a bad way because after Olave and Rashid Shaheed, that talent just drops off significantly. So if you're looking for depth at receiver, I don't know if you're going to find much in that department. And you need the talent around a quarterback like Tyler Shuck, like whoever is starting, because Derek Carr is not going to be starting the year at quarterback for the Saints. So whoever is starting their quarterback is going to need a lot of help. And unless they're really depending to be last year's Eagles, which doesn't feel like a safe bet considering the Eagles were loaded in talent on both sides of the ball, then you really needed to address that in this draft, which had some decent receivers, and you didn't do it, and that feels like a missed opportunity. And then you had teams like the Bears go next, who took Colson Loveland in the next pick, but they got Luther Burden. Like, Luther Burden could have been a great pick for the Saints, by the way. This was it was an okay draft by the Saints. I wouldn't say it was the best ever, but it was a solid draft for some of those picks. And others, it just makes you scratch your head. Let's move on to the Bears, and they took, like I said, Colson Loveland. They were rumored to get Tyler Warren if they went tight end, and they went Loveland, and some people are saying that he actually could be a decent pickup for the Bears. Luther Burden is also a great pick, I think, honestly, to put right behind Rome Odunze, and I think Keenan Allen's still there. If you have Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, and Luther Burden, that could be a decent trio of receivers, honestly. And then you get Ozzie Trapilo out of Boston College, Lamar Turner out of Texas A&M. It felt like overall a decent draft. It wasn't awful by any means, but I feel like even when they did go running back, he feels okay. He sounds like a solid pick for the seventh round, but it feels like they could have gotten a lot better value at running back or a better pick. They could have gone. I think DJ Giddens might have been a perfect pick for the Bears at running back. or Devin Neal, one of the two. Complements Swift in some ways. It sounds like Monongi is a bruiser, and that's probably what they need to contrast with DeAndre Swift, who's more of an elusive pass catching running back. So maybe that's kind of what they're looking for, and the others just didn't fit their bill. Overall, this feels like a very solid draft by the Bears. Luke Newman feels like an interesting pick out of Michigan State. He had 37 games at left tackle for Holy Cross, so he has a lot of experience. It's going to be interesting to see how they use these picks to better the defense that is now being coached by Dennis Allen. And Ben Johnson is going to get creative. So this feels like some good picks overall with like Luther Burden, Colston Loveland. This could be a very Detroit style offense for the Bears. And honestly, if you're a Bears fan, I'm sure you're going to take that, considering where the Lions are now. And then you go next to the Niners, who took Michael Williams. He feels like an okay pick. I'm not like entranced by the pick by any means, but it's not an awful pick. They needed an edge rusher, so they're trying to look to help Robert Saleh in the defensive line. They want to pair someone up with Bosa, and they feel like Michael Williams will do that. He's solid. I just don't know if he's great. And then, of course, they get Alfred Collins out of Texas, Nick Martin out of Oklahoma State. Nick Martin's a good pick. He's a solid hit you linebacker who is very rugged, and he reminds me a lot of Fred Warner, so I can see why they picked him. Marquis Siegel out of Kansas State. Safety. He's got raw potential. He just, to me, feels like he's going to need time to develop. I do think, like Jordan James, he's going to be also another raw product. It feels like if there's anyone who knows how to develop, it's the Niners, right? Like they were able to develop likes of Brock Purdy. I feel like they needed to address offensive line, and they didn't do that. Offensive tackle and center. They really didn't address those needs. They're trying to build it around Salah, but then where's the protection for Brock Purdy when the offense was a huge problem last year? And you could absolutely say that was injuries and all of that. However, I just don't know if all the questions are going to be answered, and you need those questions to be answered if the Niners want to be contending once again. But this feels like a up and down draft. A lot of potential out of this draft, a lot of good potential. The question is it all going to be harnessed, or are they going to have another meh season again? The Cowboys took Tyler Booker out of Alabama. That felt like a reach, to be honest. I mean, they needed someone to replace Zach Martin. It just, why Booker when it feels like you could have gotten him later? There's a lot to like about his game, but at the same time, he's rather big. He doesn't change directions very well, but he's a good pass blocker. So on the run blocking side, he's not great, which I think is going to be. It feels weird considering Brian Schottenheimer comes from Seattle, who is a very run heavy offense the last few years. It feels like they're trying to address the running game some, but not a lot. Because they did take Jaden Blue out of Texas, who is a decent running back, but he's a pass catching running back. And the one thing they needed to address but didn't was receiver. They got a lot of defense. They got edges like Ezra Laku out of Boston College, which is a good pick. Siobhan Rebel out of East Carolina. That feels like an interesting pick. That could be fascinating to keep an eye on. Although they have Deron Bland and Trevon Diggs, so this feels like maybe a depth or developmental piece, maybe. And it feels like the others are just kind of meh. Phil Moffa from Clemson feels like a reach as well in the 7th round for the Cowboys. I feel like they addressed a lot of their defensive needs. The offensive needs are kind of lacking a little bit. Though you could say that Blue maybe is a bit of a refresher after Rico Dowdle, who's more of a bruiser and doesn't catch the ball. So maybe they're trying to give Dak a pass catching threat out of the backfield, which that could be good, honestly, if they want to try that. But overall, it feels like the Cowboys they feel like they needed to have a bit more direction on the offensive side. Granted, this was not a very deep offensive draft class, but it feels like they could have gone some receivers maybe to back up CeeDee Lamb, which feels like to me the biggest sticking point for the Cowboys. And now we get to the Dolphins, who had the Kenneth Grant and the next pick. That was a decent pick for them, giving them some edge help, considering they really need some defensive edge. And they even got Seven Elisa in the next round, which is a good pick for them, considering they needed offensive line and defensive line help. Considering Teron Armstead retired, I think Seven Elisa is good. Then after that, it felt like the Dolphins addressed some needs like giving competition for Tua and Quinn Ewers was really good, I thought, for the most part. And then you have some other picks like Ollie Gordon, who I think could be a very underrated pick. But then why do you take Dante Trader, a safety, in the fifth round when you have some other decent safeties there? Now, granted, Jason Marshall out of Florida, he could be decent. I just feel like they didn't quite meet the needs of tackle and linebacker. And to me, that feels like huge parts of the defense that were lacking last year for Miami, especially linebacker. They need some help to protect Tua, and it feels like they didn't quite address all of that when they needed to. It feels like a weird up and down draft for Miami, where they got some good pieces, they got some good depth. It just feels like they didn't quite address all the needs they needed or wanted to address going into training camp. And honestly, that's how I kind of feel about the Colts, who came up next and picked Tyler Warren out of Penn State. It felt like they hit a couple of home runs to start off the draft with Tyler Warren and then JT Tuimoloau out of Ohio State, which were some very solid picks. And then you go and take Wally out of Minnesota. I didn't like the pick at all, especially considering how set at corner the Colts are. You take DJ Giddens, one of, in my opinion, the best running backs in the draft. Riley Leonard could be decent quarterback competition for Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson, but it feels like a training camp body. Wally just does not feel very secure for me as a pick. He seems more like a depth piece in case of injury, honestly. It feels like Wally's not going to get a lot of time on the field. And the Colts also, they, like the Dolphins, didn't answer their questions at guard and linebacker, and that's huge considering they need offensive line in a bad way there in Indy, and they go with a running back and a quarterback. It feels like one of those you could have used to take a guard and help protect your franchise who you thought was Anthony Richardson. If you believe in Anthony Richardson, take him. Some offensive line help. But in a lot of ways, they also picked up some good, solid talent as well. So it feels all over the place. Like I feel like DJ Giddens could be good for the Colts too, pairing with Jonathan Taylor, with Giddens being kind of a dual pass catcher threat more often, maybe a third down back, and maybe help him grow into a bruiser. He is a bit of a bruiser as well, but Jonathan Taylor also can do that. Maybe it's also to take the load off of Jonathan Taylor. We'll have to see. That's going to be fascinating to see coming out of Indianapolis training camp. The Falcons, they started off great. A couple of edge rushers. That felt like solid picks for them considering they need edge rushers. And they lost the likes of Grady Jarrett and needed to really put pressure on the quarterback considering they hadn't done that a lot in the last couple of seasons. And James Pierce is a good pick as well for them. Xavier Watts isn't an awful pick. Then you go get Billy Bowman out of Oklahoma, who I'm not high on, and I don't know why you would take another safety after you just got a safety. And you have other needs like D tackle and receiver. After Drake London, the talent is lacking for receivers for Atlanta. So I don't know why they picked another safety. They only had 5 picks in this draft. And then they get Jack Nelson and the tackle out of Wisconsin in the 7th round. They need a center and a D tackle as well. So to me, it feels like they really harped on a couple of things in edge and safety with the limited picks they had. They picked twice in the first round. They traded up to get Pierce. I don't know. To me, it feels like they gave up a lot just to get 2 edge rushers, 2 safeties, and a tackle when they needed receiver and D tackle and a center. So to me, this feels like a very lacking draft from the Falcons. It screams like they're going to have good defensive line help, but that means you trust your secondary. And maybe they put Pierce in the D tackle spot because it feels like the other one they got was more of a edge rusher, pure edge rusher. Jalen Walker is more of a edge linebacker. So maybe that's the thinking they put Pierce at the D tackle spot. If that's the case, it makes more sense. But still, you need receiver. You need more help for Michael Penix. It feels like the Falcons kind of let down the team a bit with this draft. Now, the Cardinals, they came up next, and I feel like they had a very solid draft as well. They got Walter Nolan. They got Will Johnson, 2 incredible talents on the defensive side of the ball. Will Johnson's going to be a starter day one in that team, and I feel like they are really trying to help Jonathan Gannon make the system work. And I feel like they hit a lot of their needs correctly, like with guard and corner. Denzel Burke is another good corner. I really think Jordan Birch out of Oregon as well is going to be a good edge rusher. This is going to be a very young Cardinals defense. It's going to be fun. They got Hank Connor out of Texas. a guard, so it's good they got guard. The only problem is Kyler's not going to have any receiver help, and I feel like they could have maybe gotten that. This wasn't a very heavy skill position class, so it feels like whoever was going to get them was going to get them. The other teams who need those receivers are going to be lacking. If the Cardinals really want to compete, they showed last year that they can compete. They just need a couple of big players. If Marvin Harrison and Greg Dortch are both stepping up, that could be a very dangerous offense as well. And this could be a team that could do some damage in the playoffs. I really like this young defense and what Jonathan Gannon is building on that side of the ball. Overall, I'm quite impressed. I thought there was a lot of good stuff that they did in this draft, and I'm liking it a lot. Kudos to the Cardinals front office for just very much hitting the targets for the most part that they needed on defense, especially, and getting a guard as well to protect Kyler if he can stay upright. They always have a chance because I think last year he showed that he's a rather underrated quarterback. The Bengals were next. I feel like they had a very risky, weird class. Shamar Stewart was I think, not a first round talent. I think they could have gotten better picks than that. I feel like they could have gotten like Simmons to help bolster their offensive line. I mean, Fairchild, when they did get him in the third, he's more of a developmental prospect, in my opinion. I don't feel like they addressed it very well. They tried to address needs, but it feels like to me they addressed them in confusing ways. Getting Taj Brooks, for example, why do you need a running back? You don't need a running back. You're pretty much set at running back, it feels like. You have Chase Brown as your starter, and then they're going to bring back Zach Moss, I think. So why do you need more running backs? I think you have another depth piece as well. So why bring in Taj Brooks? I mean, I like Taj Brooks. He's a solid running back, and I think he got drafted a little too low, but to the wrong team. I feel like they tried to address some defensive needs as well. The guy from South Carolina feels like a solid pick for the Bengals. I just didn't like how they drafted in particular. To me, it feels like they reached with some picks instead of trying to be sensible and look for actual talent. Instead, it felt like they went for the big names in those rounds. And I feel like that's not going to help them in the long run, especially on defense. It feels like kind of what they've done in the last few years is kind of do that very same thing, and that to me is a very risky proposition. They're set on offense if they don't know how to do defense. Now, maybe these are picks that Golden really likes, the defensive coordinator for the Bengals. I just don't know if these are picks that will help them in the long run to improve that defense, which is all they really need, improving the defense. And it feels like they just are keeping it as status quo. The Seahawks, they picked Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State. It feels like this is a solid pick overall. The name is very interesting to me. You rarely hear the name Gray. That's kind of where my brain went when I first saw this pick. They really needed to address offensive line, and they went and got a solid prospect in Zabel, who a lot of people really like with this pick. He's very good. He's very physical, and he fits really well into Clint Kubiak's scheme. So I think it's a very, very solid pick for them. The Seahawks need another couple of offensive line pieces, but they really tried to address a lot of it. They got Jalen Milroe as well to back up Sam Darnold. So that could be interesting if in a year or two, if Darnold decides to leave or he retires or whatever, that Milroe is being groomed there to replace Darnold, and that could be a great succession plan. Torrey Horton out of Colorado State feels like a decent pick. Not my favorite, but he could be okay. It feels like they addressed a lot of the needs they had, like with receiver and guard and tackle. I don't know if they addressed much of the edge rusher need that they had. They have good D tackle, solid D tackles in Riley Mills, and they got Nick Emmanuel, the safety out of South Carolina, and Damian Martinez, solid running back out of Miami. It feels like they made a lot of solid, well, not high name picks, but they made enough of good picks that this will maybe set them up for success. But it feels like this team is a year or two away. They're really trying to build the defense up. They're trying to build the offensive line, which is good. I mean, in Darnold's first year, you really need to do that, especially since they lost DK Metcalf. They lost Tyler Lockett, and JSN is now clearly the top receiver in Seattle. So you really need to step up the receiver game there, and they got a couple of receivers. Now it's time to see if that can pan out. It's not my favorite draft. Elijah Roy was another pick for them, and that's a solid pick. So they're trying to get younger. They're in Seattle. They're trying to recreate the Legion of Boom as well, probably. I feel like it's a solid overall draft. I think if you're a Seahawks fan, you're okay with it. But I do think there are still some questions to be had over the interior of the Seahawks O-line, and this is going to be a developmental year, I think. I mean, the Seahawks, they underachieved last year, and now they're going to kind of be meh once again. I don't know if they're going to contend for playoffs. If these picks pan out right, then maybe they do actually get into the playoffs. I think it's overall an okay class, but there's some work still to be done. Mika Ibuka was next. He went to Tampa. To me, it feels like a bit of a reach in the first round to get Ibuka. I mean, he's a first round talent. But why do you? I think they got Justin Watson in free agency. They have Godwin. They have Evans. So where is he going to be playing? I feel like that's the huge issue to me. They addressed corner Jacob Parrish and Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame and Kansas State. Some solid picks there. Parrish is one of the top corner prospects in the draft. And then you go and get an edge rusher, David Walker, out of Central Arkansas. In the fourth, I mean, they had limited picks. It feels like they were really trying to address the edge rusher conundrum there. And Tez Johnson in the seventh round out of Oregon isn't a bad value pick either. I do feel like, though, they needed to address at the tight end. They have a good number one in Cade Otton. He's not an awful number one that you could have there. And linebacker. Those are the two needs that they needed to meet that they didn't in this draft. But I mean, if you did get a tight end, it would be a depth piece there in Tampa. So I'm not too mad about it. But still, it feels overall like they tried to address a lot of the heavier issues going on with both the offense and defense. So you can't complain about that. I feel like Ibuka is kind of a weird one considering they might not have a lot of depth there to play with. But hey, if Ibuka is a needed receiver, he's a good option to have. He's good speed and good directional quickness and all of that. So if that's where they're looking for, then they had I think a decently solid draft class. So I think if they addressed a linebacker, I think this would be take them over the top. The Broncos had a really good draft. They had some great solid value with some upgrades to the defense, like with their pick in this round, they had Jedi Barron out of Texas, the corner. Put him next to Pat Surtain. If he pans out, that would be an incredibly good pick by the Broncos. R.J. Harvey is a solid running back out of UCF. So is Pat Bryant as a receiver out of Illinois. Some depth to that receiving core that they needed to give them. They even brought in running back and tight end and punter competition in the later rounds. I think Pat Bryant could be a really good sneaky pick. I think he's a very underrated receiver. And if they can get him in good spots, he's tall. He's very much a Cortland Sutton, but younger. Cortland Sutton is 30, I think, and I think he's about to have his contract expire with the team. So I'm sure Bryant is going to be more of a depth piece at this point. But I'm sure if he pans out, he's going to take off, and I think he could be a star in this league. The Steelers were next. They went Derek Harmon out of Oregon. I think it's a solid pick overall for them. They needed to help back up Cam Hayward. And if you're looking for that kind of depth, then Harmon is good, considering they did need to bolster the defense, give themselves a very good defensive line, and get pressure on teams. And then you had, in my opinion, one of the better picks in the draft at quarterback, and Will Howard. To me, I feel like he was going to be the quarterback for them. I feel like they had a lot of great value and a lot of needs were addressed. If you're looking for a team that wanted to solidly address needs on both sides of the ball, except for receiver, I feel like the Steelers did that in a lot of good ways. They had Derek Harmon. They had Jack Sawyer off the edge. Caleb Johnson is a good running back to pair off with Jalen Warren, a bit of a bruiser compared with the more athletic, shifty Jalen Warren. And then you have like Carson Bruner out of Washington as a linebacker, Yaya Black out of Iowa as a D tackle. Again, defense was a huge emphasis in this draft, and to me, overall, it was a very solid draft with lots of promise. It just feels like it was a lot of developmental talent for the Steelers. But if it pans out, it's going to work out for them, I think, especially since they're trying to get younger and not as veteran heavy as well. And they got the quarterback of the future probably in Will Howard, even if they are still looking at Aaron Rodgers. I think them passing on Shador says they're still hoping that Aaron Rodgers comes to them, which I think is a very interesting move. But if they are going with Aaron Rodgers, Will Howard couldn't hurt to learn from him for a year or two. I do worry about them having no depth at tackle or receiver, though. That feels like a problem. If they can't address the tackle part, especially with Junior gone, Dan Moore Jr. gone, then they are gonna maybe suffer there. And of course, they have okay receiver depth in DK Metcalf and George Pickens. I think they're gonna be hurting for receiver a bit. If Pickens and Metcalf are on the edges, receiver, then they're going to probably be okay there in Pittsburgh. The Chargers were next, and they took a very good running back in Omarion Hampton to pair up with Najee Harris, go with a typical Harbaugh two-back system since J.K. Dobbins left, so that's solid overall. I think Najee's probably going to be the starter. Trey Harris was a great pick to give Justin Herbert a downfield threat. They also added a couple of others. They had a lot of great depth, addressed needs effectively, had great value for the most part. Overall, for the Chargers, it was very solid. I don't think they missed a lot on their needs, and they smashed a lot of them and really knew how to attack this draft. Jamari Caldwell out of Oregon feels like a bit of a reach for them. But otherwise, a very solid draft. I do think they need to address guard, and that could be an issue for them considering they need another guard to help back up Justin Herbert, especially since he's been injured a lot lately. I think they just needed to address a couple positions, and otherwise they were pretty golden. Speaking of golden, that's where the Packers went. They went with Matthew Golden at pick 23, a receiver out of Texas. That was the first, if you can believe this, the first receiver picked in the first round by Green Bay since 2002. That's insane. Overall, I think this Green Bay draft was excellent. They got Anthony Belton out of NC State, a good contender for tackle there in Green Bay. They had Savion Williams, another shifty product that they needed for receiver depth. I'm sure that they might be looking to trim the receiver room a bit there, considering how it was last year, so up and down. So they're probably looking to put some fresh faces in and see how that goes. Baron Sorrell out of Texas, the edge rusher, is also a decent pick for them. They met a lot of their needs. They met a lot of good potential, good value picks overall, I think. And I'm really impressed by how well the Packers did in attacking the draft and attacking a lot of their needs at key positions, and overall feeling that like they have a lot of depth at a lot of good positions, and now just seeing if they can optimize all of those picks and make them worthy to help the Packers actually get back to a playoff spot. Donovan Jackson was next, the guard out of Ohio State. I'm kind of shocked, honestly, that they didn't go with someone else. But I mean, considering the Vikings needed a guard, it's a good pick for them overall. It was overall a good pick, I think, and considering they only have a very few picks overall in this draft, they needed to optimize them well. To me, though, they had only two good picks, and that was Jackson and Felton, the receiver out of Maryland. Otherwise, they really tried to just bolster some depth, it looks like, at edge and linebacker and tight end, and then didn't really address the interior of the defense or the corner or safety, which to me that feels like are huge. Secondary is such a big problem for the Vikings. If somehow though the prospects from other drafts can pan out, maybe they'll be okay. So that could hurt them in the end. And then we go to the Ravens, who took Malachi Stark. I think that was the best pick of the first round. The Ravens just nailed that one on the head. A very good, hard-hitting safety out of Georgia. Pair him with Kyle Hamilton. No one's going to want to go across the middle. Mike Green out of Marshall was a good pick for them on the edge as well. The Ravens just hit a lot of good picks in most areas. They even went and got a kicker with Justin Tucker's situation looming. It feels like they needed to address that. Again, another great draft by DaCosta out of Baltimore. One of my favorite drafts in the entire league. Emory Jones Jr. could be a steal if he pans out. If Loop is the kicker they drafted. If Loop is going to pan out, then they have some great depth behind Justin Tucker. I feel like the Ravens just got a lot of good value for the picks they had, and they addressed all the needs that they really had. Aaron DaCosta, the GM for Baltimore, he does not usually miss when he's drafting, and he knows what he's doing. The Detroit Lions are next, and they picked Tyleik Williams. They really wanted to hit on a lot of areas, I think, that were injured last year, like D tackle, edge, guard, and receiver. So they went out and did that. And Tyleik Williams was a good pick for them to help bolster that defensive line, though it feels more like he's a developmental piece considering they are very deep at D line already. Tate Rutledge was a good guard pick out of Georgia. Overall, I think they did okay, but center is something the Lions need to address. Otherwise, I feel like Miles Frazier, a decent guard pickup. Dominic Lovett probably is my favorite pick. He was the seventh round. He has a lot of drop problems, but if they can get over that part, I think he could be a decent pick out of the seventh round for them. And it's going to be an interesting year now that Ben Johnson has left for Chicago. To see how Detroit, handles that. But if they can handle it well, then there's no way that this can't be a good draft for them because Detroit's been so good at drafting the last couple of years. Josh Connerly Jr. of Oregon, the tackle, he went to Washington in this next pick. And Washington, they came into this draft with a lot of optimism, hoping to build on the optimism with Jalen Daniels last year. Connerly, a good pick for them. Trey Amos, a good pick for them as well on the corner out of Ole Miss. So they addressed the corner needs. Jalen Lane out of Virginia Tech feels kind of meh to me. I feel like what they didn't do, though, is address the secondary and especially the safety position. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt feels like a bit of a reach for them in the seventh round. But otherwise, like edge and safety, I feel like are the two needs that Washington needed to address because that outside defensive line is not that great for Washington. But otherwise, it feels like a solid draft overall for Washington. Not anything too risky, but at the same time, they needed to address some more issues they didn't quite address. The Bills, they came in trying to clearly boost the defense. After last year, they were kind of torn up by the Chiefs in the AFC Championship, and they did that with Hairston coming in the first round. Landon Jackson on the edge could be a stud. However, they really didn't address receiver for them, and a seventh round receiver probably won't make up for that. But otherwise, they did a great job at filling a lot of positions in need. Overall, it's a very solid draft. I was pretty impressed by it overall. Jordan Hancock out of Ohio State is a good corner. TJ Sanders was a good defensive tackle pickup for them as well. And if they can, know how to hone that, they needed to really nail this draft because the defense feels like the weakest part. The offense was great last year. I mean, obviously Josh Allen won MVP, but if they are really to contend, they really need to take a step up on defense. Now, I think they could have addressed safety, but that wasn't a huge priority for them. Hopefully, they feel like they addressed a lot of their good needs, and if they did, they could be a problem once again in the AFC. Jahad Campbell for the Eagles was such a steal. They needed a linebacker, and now they've got a great trio of linebackers there in Philly. Howie Roseman, once again, he traded up one pick just to get him. The Chiefs got an extra fifth round pick out of it, which was kind of funny. But a great linebacker in the first round like Jahad Campbell, even though the Chiefs probably weren't going to get him with the 31st pick, feels like, even though that trade was a bit of a reach, I feel like the Eagles overall got some great value in some good specific areas. Now, what I don't think they did well was not address tight end, receiver, and guard, which I feel like they need to address all three of those spots. Receiver, especially right after Devontae Smith, just feels like it falls off a cliff. Tight end is more of a depth position for me, just because Goddard, and after that, the cliff is steep. It feels like they just really are trying to boost the trenches and, be very much a Philly style team. Make sure the defense is loaded once again, which they did very well, I think. And then offensive line was bolstered a lot as well, except for guard, which I think, I don't know, maybe they can use one of these offensive tackle prospects they took late in the draft to swing over to guard. But if there's anything that the Eagles can do, it's develop talent. And we've seen that over the years, and I think they'll be okay. It wasn't the best draft, in my opinion, for the Eagles, but they did address like edge and defensive tackle, which were huge gaping holes, and I think they filled them quite well. The Chiefs, to me, had a very sneaky good draft. They needed to really clearly bolster the defense, and I think they did that quite well. They also bolstered the O-line with their first pick in Josh Simmons, and that was a home run pick for them. Veach obviously also wanted to bolster the D-line and the trenches. He got Omar Lott and Noel Williams. Solid picks, I think, and great value. The only slight thing could be that you say they don't have a ton of skill position talent, but I think Jane Royals could be a very sneaky good pick for them. Underrated gem of a receiver. He's a very good athlete. He's tall, he can be physical and break away, and he has some decent route tree stuff. And then also Ashton Jalop could be an underrated edge rusher next to Karlaftis and Omenahu. If they can get sacks out of the pressures that they had last year, then that defense could take another step up, which is scary to think about considering the Chiefs are one of the top defenses in the league. They really wanted to hammer the defense and make sure they had a lot of good, solid pieces to address some weaknesses. Noel Williams, I think, is going to be great for them and helps give them some bit of flexibility in the secondary as well. Overall, a very sneaky good draft by the Chiefs. And I think they addressed a lot of the needs they needed to address. The Rams didn't pick until the second round, neither did the Texans. And the Rams, they needed to address linebacker. They needed to address quarterback. I think right after Matt Stafford retires is going to be an interesting question. They didn't address either quarterback or corner, but they addressed linebacker and receiver and running back, and they did that quite well. Terrence Ferguson out of Oregon is a solid pick. Josiah Stewart out of Michigan is a decent edge rusher. Jaquez Hunter out of Auburn, the running back, that could be an interesting pick to go behind Kyron Williams. I think that's really solid. Chris Paul Jr., the linebacker out of Ole Miss, is also a stupidly good pick in the fifth round. Ty Hamilton and Kantai Mumfield are okay. Not my all-time favorite picks. I feel like you could have addressed corner better, and I'm not too worried about quarterback right now. Matt Stafford is obviously your answer for this year. After this year, who knows? But obviously, they felt like they could go into next season's draft class with which will have better quarterback prospects and get the quarterback then. So I feel like they addressed a lot of the needs and gave some depth behind Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, and Puka Nacua. Well, I think this is going to be such a fun offense for the Rams. The defense could have some issues, the secondary particularly, but overall, I feel like they bolstered the interior with some good D line and some linebacker depth as well. Houston had a very interesting draft. They became the Iowa State Cyclones because they picked two receivers out of Iowa State. Not saying this is bad because they picked two solid receivers to give depth to their receiving core after seeing how losing Tank Dell last season really hurt the offense and really slowed down any momentum they had going to the playoffs where they lost to the Chiefs. They also were able to address offensive line. I don't know how to pronounce his first name, but Ursary could be a good contender to start on the O line after losing most of it in free agency, like Larry Tunsil to the Commanders. Jalen Smith could also be a sneaky pick. However, while they address the needs, Smith feels like a perfect example of getting players out of positions they already have decent depth at, like at corner, where you have Stingley, and they don't really need that. Also, they got a quarterback, which I don't think they really need. I don't know. To me, that felt like a bit of a reach, especially with Graham Mertz, who wasn't that great of a quarterback either. It felt like a very up and down draft that overall saw a lot of solid talent. And with that, we have covered the NFL side of things. Let's quickly head to the pitch side, where we saw the EFL Championship head to the penultimate weekend. And this was a very interesting in terms of the relegation battle, and the EFL is just so interesting now because you have teams like Preston and North End somehow still in it because they lost to Plymouth Argyle 2-1. And a team that was just comfortably mid-table only a few weeks ago is all of a sudden only a point from safety. And then you have like Hull City losing to Derby County 1-0 after staying so many weeks out of the relegation zone, out of the pesky results they've gotten, like against Coventry City, for example. And all of a sudden they are now in the relegation zone, taking Luton Town's spot, because now Luton Town, they've just been in blazing hot form. They beat Coventry City 1-0 on a late 91st minute goal that sent them hurtling out of the relegation zone. And now if Luton probably get a result, they're safe probably, unless all the other relegation teams get results like wins probably in their game. And then Cardiff, they draw with West Brom, and that's not what they need at all. They go foot of the table, and that probably just saw them relegated, honestly. And that's really sad because, they've been scrapping and trying to fight for so long, but I feel like Omar Riza getting sacked really kind of doomed them to the fate they have now seen themselves in. Now you have like Plymouth Argyle, only 3 points from safety, and they need another win. They need to just keep their blazing hot form intact. The only setback they've had was the loss at Middlesbrough, and that feels huge now. That penalty call on Tommy Conway, and if that hadn't been called, Plymouth probably get the draw, get a point, and that probably sees them only 2 points off of safety. And who knows what happens on the final day. So it's just going to be so tasty to see all of that. And then, of course, you have the playoff race, which saw like Middlesbrough drawing with Norwich City. But then you have teams. So Millwall and Blackburn both won. Blackburn is now on a hot streak. They are very much in it. They're only a point off the playoffs now. And Millwall tied Coventry. With Coventry's loss, Millwall tied them on points. It's just Millwall has a 0 goal difference. So now they're just hoping that Coventry lose to Middlesbrough next week and that Millwall can get a result, but it's at Burnley. So that's huge. And then Blackburn has Sheffield United next week. So that feels like if they do not get a result against either of those sides, that it's down to Middlesbrough and Coventry. And Middlesbrough just looked so underwhelming, so very not prepared for their game against Norwich. If they had won that game, they'd be in the playoff places, and it would mean they had everything to play for. A draw or a win probably saw them go into the playoffs, and that's just very disappointing for them considering, they needed a result more than 1 point. I mean, a point does them good because now they're only 2 points off the playoffs, and a win sees them over the line, unless like Millwall and Blackburn both get results that are like 3 points each. But, I mean, if Blackburn and Millwall both get all 3 points in their matches, they go into the playoffs, and Coventry and Middlesbrough are out, which at the beginning of the year and, coming into the last couple of weeks did not feel likely. And so all of a sudden, the mood at Blackburn has drastically shifted from a club that feels desperate, feels gloomy. Now they're contending for the playoffs all of a sudden. I don't think anyone in this spot feels like they deserve it, though. It doesn't feel like anyone who gets the last 2 playoff spots is going to deserve it. I mean, okay, so Bristol City haven't played Leeds yet. So if they do not get a result at Leeds, they will also be looking over their shoulder because because then they're only 2 points. Well, they're a point ahead of Millwall and 2 points ahead of Blackburn. So they really need to get results in the next couple of matches. And they don't play Leeds until tomorrow or Monday on Sunday when we record this. So they need all 3 points against Leeds. If not, they are going to very much look over their shoulder and feel like they haven't done enough the last couple of weeks. It just feels like this last 2 playoff spots, they don't deserve it after kind of the results they've had lately. Meanwhile, Sunderland, they lost to Oxford United, which guaranteed Oxford's safety. I mean, good for them and good for Portsmouth. They both secured safety in the championship for the season after both like having their struggles this season. Both teams being in the relegation zone at some point in the season or very close. I mean, Oxford were tipped at the beginning of the season to go down, so this feels like a very huge win for that club to stay up in the championship. And of course, Sheffield United and Sunderland are both guaranteed playoff spots at this point. Sheffield United, they got a solid win against Stoke as well. Burnley absolutely blasted QPR 5-0. So it feels like all these races are just coming down to the relegation battle and the last playoff spot. If Bristol City somehow lose the Leeds, though, then there's a chance that that could be final 2 playoff spots on the final day. Coventry against Middlesbrough is the hugest game. Hugest is not a word, but here we are. If whoever wins that game gets in, will probably get into the playoffs, especially if Bristol City lose. Yeah, I don't know. That could be so interesting going into the final day, considering just all the lost points and the opportunities to just clinch a playoff spot. Like Coventry, if they had won their last 2 games, this could have been over. And there would be no question that they would be in the playoffs. But now they've left the door wide open for 3 different teams besides them to get in. And if watch Middlesbrough somehow turn on the switch against Coventry City, and if Burnley and Sheffield United both show out, then Middlesbrough gets into the playoffs places, and they're 9th right now. So it's crazy time in the championship Final day is always going to be so fascinating. You're going to have so many people looking at different games, checking their phones. It's at Coventry, and then of course you have the relegation battle. Everyone from 18th down is in danger of getting relegated. Bristol City take on Preston. So if Bristol City somehow beat Preston, Preston is in huge trouble. Derby County take on Stoke. That could be a very telling game as well. So who knows how that's going to go. Cardiff take on Norwich City. Norwich City, of course, coming off a draw. Where, it feels like against Middlesbrough, they were really just trying to waste time and take the opportunities they were given because they didn't want to lose, basically. Plymouth take on Leeds. That feels like an insurmountable task almost. And Hull take on Portsmouth. West Brom take on Luton as well. So there are some huge games that have a lot of implications coming up this coming weekend, and we love it, and we will be here for it. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Pitch Grid. We greatly appreciate it. Please follow us on all our social media platforms. We are on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Audible. We are also on TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter, and Facebook. We post a lot of short content lately, so please check that out as well if you haven't yet. We thank you so much for any and all support that you have shown for the show. We have 37 subscribers on YouTube. That's incredible. I would not have thought that would be possible only starting this a few months ago. So thank you for all who are tuning in, supporting the show. I greatly appreciate you and hope to see you for the next episode.